And we're back. Welcome everyone to the GuideWell Insights Lounge. We're here at day 3 of Singularity University's Exponential Medicine. My name is Kate Warnock. We're so delighted to have you here with us again. And I have a fascinating person here to interview with me right now, Stephen Keating. Stephen, welcome to the interview.
Thanks for having me. I don't know how fascinating I really am, but thank you for the invitation.
Just looking at the props that you've brought, I can guarantee you're going to stand out. Let me introduce who you are just a bit. You're a patient advocate and a PhD candidate at the MIT Media Lab. So let's start. I know that you're going to be speaking today on main stage here at Exponential Medicine, and you brought along some really interesting things that's going to help you give that talk. Why don't you walk us through it?
Sure. So these kind of look like random things. I know this is a skull. This is actually my skull. If you had your finger, you could feel this and you could feel that, and these are metal staples because this is what happened during the surgery when I had a large brain tumor removed in 2014 in summer. So I'm speaking today on what that experience is like from the patient perspective and why it was so difficult to access patient data. And my situation is a little bit interesting. I'm not actually in healthcare at all. My PhD is with Mediated Matter Group, and that's how to make things. It's on 3D printing and growing things.
Okay.
But I've always been curious about data, and I volunteered for a research study in 2007. And I just wanted to see my brain. I wanted to help science. So I did the research study, and I asked for the data back. And they said, oh, by the way, we found a small abnormality in your frontal left lobe. And no one knew what it was, and so I got it rechecked, and there wasn't much concern because it was very small. I had no symptoms. I got it rechecked in 2010, 3 years later. Hadn't changed, so there wasn't much concern.
Okay.
Then 2014, last summer, started to smell a very faint vinegar smell for just a few seconds a day. After the third day, I was in my bedroom, and I thought, there's no vinegar here. So I went back to the doctors. They weren't really concerned, but I said, I think this is linked to that abnormality. It's near, that data shows abnormality near the smell center. So they booked the scan for a month later because there wasn't much concern, and the scan showed a tumor this size, a 1-to-1 scale. And 3 weeks later, they cut out 10% of my brain. And so I started collecting as much data as I could. I posted it all online to share with family and friends, and that created actually quite a response. It generated support for me. It opened up new treatment options for me, and let me share that experience so other people with brain tumors, with brain cancer, can see, okay, what did Stephen do? He was at MIT, he had amazing professors helping him along the way. What were the decisions he made? What proton treatment did he have? What were the results of his chemotherapy? So I'm speaking on those topics today and asking the question, why can't we have a share button at the hospital? And of course, if you don't want to share anything, you don't need to share anything.
Right.
But if you want to, how come right now the patient is last in line? So it'll be interesting. There'll be people in the audience today who are doctors at my hospital. And even though they're not my doctors, if they have a computer in front of them, they can log on the internet to the hospital website, go in, pull up my information, and see all my MRI scans in a beautiful format, right? You can get all access to my data. But for me, if I want to see that data, which is my own data, I have to fill out paperwork, to wait and get in the mail 10 to 20 or 30 CDs of MRI scans, of PDFs of hundreds of scanned pages, which are really hard to interpret.
Absolutely.
So how come you can't have Facebook with a little health tab, right? Even if only 0.001% of the population on Facebook wanted to share any of their health data, it would be by far the world's biggest medical study. And the benefits could be huge. So I'm very excited that some of the new policies in the last year, especially in the US, have been focused on getting patient access to data. So Obama's got the new Precision Medicine Initiative. Actually, some of the new paradigms for that was announced 2 days ago with a strong focus on getting patient access to data. There's a new Meaningful Use Phase 3 final rule that came out last month, which now requires an API, which is an application programming interface, by 2018. That was one of the main points that I had pushed for back in the summer when it was just a proposed rule of either an e-patient portal or an API, and I said no. Wrote a strong comment saying we don't care about e-patient portals because if you've used an e-patient portal, you'll know they're broken. There's hundreds of e-patient portals, and it's what the standard of care is right now. You go to a hospital, you want to view your data? Sure you can, but you type into this each hospital has a different e-patient portal, and if you try to download your data, you usually can't. And if you can, you're not able to make any use of it. But if you have an API, it's standardized, you can use the free market to drive the innovations. So for example, If you have an API that all hospitals have to follow, you could have Google Maps. You could have Facebook. You could have Dropbox for health. You could have a 3D print my skull app so that if you go in to get a CT or an MRI scan, you come out on your iPhone and you go, oh sure, I'll pay my $30 and I'll receive my printed skull because I think that's interesting.
Yeah.
Or sure, I'll submit my blood tests online to this research group because they said that they're going to make me an author. So here I am, I just pressed a share button and now I'm a co-author. And yeah, there's thousands of others are co-authors, but hey, I've contributed to science.
All right, so we have to start with the basics. First of all, how is your health today?
Well, I mean, I have 3 more months of chemotherapy left.
Okay.
So it's still a very inactive situation for me.
Okay.
I'm doing well. I did proton radiation. I definitely had some effects. I've lost about half of my sense of smell. I have sleep issues, but generally doing well. I try to take it all in a good light. You know, each of us goes through a very different path in life, and from my perspective, we're all on a different roller coaster, so you might as well enjoy the view, because not many people get to sit inside a particle accelerator. I did. I now know what it's like to have protons. So that's little particles of matter shot at 300 million miles an hour at your face. And it doesn't hurt, but for me, it was near my optical nerve. So I could actually, when I had my eyes closed, I would see blue fractals of lightning in my left eyeball when the proton radioactivity was hitting me. So not many people get to experience that. And if I can experience it and share that experience and tell other people, yeah, it's not painful, it's actually kind of interesting,
right,
maybe that'll help.
You know, and so I think that your background, you know, at the MIT Media Lab, look at this, you know, what you've brought for us here today. I think that you're taking something that's very perhaps difficult to understand and conceptualize. You have actual, you know, tangible pieces that people can hold in their hands and maybe better understand what might be a condition that they're also experiencing. So I was hoping that maybe you could work through some of the other pieces that you have
here.
Sure,
absolutely. So I mean, a lot of these are very standard prints, like this one was a single STL, but some of them are more complex, and I'm working with researchers in our group, Mediated Matter, and at the Wyss Institute at Harvard to do multi-material printing. So we can actually print with variable stiffness, with variable opacity, with variable material properties. So in the future, medical students might be dissecting themselves. You might get a full body scan, get a full body print, and instead of having to learn through a textbook, you might be cutting open your own printed head. Or you could do practice surgeries, or you could have custom microfluidics. So we've done a project at the Mediated Matter Group where you can 3D print microfluidics. And the everyday person can do this because you can use sites like Shapeways, which have 3D printers that will print for you and you pay for materials. So for example, if you wanted to 3D print your tumor or my tumor, the STL file's online on my website, stephenkeating.info. You could download it, submit that to Shapeways and say, I want it printed out of glass, and I'll put a couple holes on the bottom because I want to make it into a salt shaker. And so I ended up giving out these to my whole family as Christmas tree ornaments, right? So what I'm very interested in is this idea of distributed fabrication, distributed knowledge, and patients as partners in their own care.
So, you know, before we leave to the next question, this one closest to me I'm fascinated by. What are we looking at here?
Well, that one is actually a proton backstop. So from the particle accelerator, that's what protons do. I mean, it's obviously a much higher exposure and a longer exposure than what's done to patients, but that's what actually would stop the protons. It's kind of fun to see.
Wow.
And I had one other comment. So if anyone wants to help on this situation, there's 2 policies right now that you can write public comment on. So meaningful use phase 3, if you type in meaningful use phase 3 in the Office of National Coordinator, you can write a public comment and you can say, yes, we want a public API that's controlled by the patient. We want the ability to say, yes, give me my data and okay, share it with this company or share it with no one. And the other policy which we can write on is the common rule. Common rule dictates how all human subject research is done. Right. There's a new proposal that came out about a month ago, and there's a specific element that says a study can avoid IRB review, which is kind of a process that a lot of people would want to avoid because it takes time and money. But you can only avoid it if you guarantee no data is returned to the patient, if there's no risk to the patient. So what that means is, for example, for my brain tumor tissue that was taken, I donated it to science, it got sequenced, I still don't have that data back.
Understood.
Now, they put that piece in because companies are saying, well, if we don't give the data back to the patient, there can be no harm to the patient because they can't misinterpret the data or do something stupid with it. But from the other perspective, if patients can have access to that data, we can share it with other researchers. We can use it ourselves. And yeah, if I'm donating part of my brain for science, that is so valuable, the least I can expect is to see my own genome when literally my university colleagues and my doctors can already do that.
All right, so many questions that come to mind. Stephen, probably first and foremost is, not everybody has your background. Not everybody
Sure.
is in the field that you're in, has access to clinicians who can help you interpret what you're reading. If the average consumer is going to write in and say, yes, I want my genome, how is it, and reams of other data,
Sure.
how is it that we can really help that person understand what they're seeing so that there isn't any harm, but there is really truly the value that would come of possessing that themselves?
Sure. So I think from a very basic level, just start asking more questions. When you go to the hospital and you get scanned up, ask for the data. Start making it apparent that, yeah, you're interested in this. If you want to take if you want to do more, you could actually write a public comment. You could write on the meaningful use phase 3 or the common rule and say, patients should have full access to their data. And not just full access, but standardized access so that you can send it to other tool sets. So a nice example is programming languages. So on your computer, not many people know how to go into the computer, into the source code, and actually change something in the programming language, right? We just use Windows or Mac,
right,
and we just use the operating system. But there's no law against you going into the code and actually make modifications. And so for the very small percentage of the population that are coders that want to go in and modify their computer, they can do that. And that enables this huge amount of development and growth and incentivization. Patients should have the same ability. So even if patients don't understand the data, there could be tool sets to let them understand it. So for example, yes, we don't understand genomes or MRIs or certain other types of data very well, but say there's an app that would 3D print it for you. So you could download on your iPhone. If there's a standard API, a company could make an app called Print My Skull, right? And maybe they want your MRI data for research, so they're going to make it free and give you your skull if you donate your MRI data. So then you've got a beautiful relationship because the free market is saying, yeah, we're going to use this as research data, so we want it. And to incentivize patients to give us access to the data, we're going to 3D print their skull as a representation for them.
So I think what you're painting a picture where there's so many, that's such a win-win. Not only is the consumer getting access to their information, what the potential is for them to add to this global repository of data that's really going to help advance research and really help find solutions to brain tumors, to perhaps those diseases that so little is known about, where that information becomes even more critical when you have such a small population that might be working with a particular disease themselves. So I think that what you're speaking to is a theme that's been discussed so much here at Exponential Medicine, Stephen, and that's really the democratization of health. And so what I think you're suggesting is that we're empowering the patient by giving them that information, but in turn, we're truly advancing the potential of medicine by giving researchers so much more information to take that next step forward.
Exactly, and I think it's really important to realize it's not just for the patient. This will help doctors, this will help supporters, this will help researchers.
Absolutely, and truly grow the economy on top of it. When you talk about open API, I mean the opportunity for coders to come in and do what they've done with, access that they've had now to other APIs, I think the potential is just limitless. All right, I have to ask you another question.
Sure.
How can consumers, and I think this would be very relevant to you, how can consumers ensure that funding supports what they most want researched, and how can that dialogue create a tipping point?
Yeah, I mean this fits perfectly into what we're just saying about the API, because if you have patients in control of that data, then the free market has to figure out, and researchers have to figure out ways to incentivize the patient to support their study.
Right.
So for example, imagine if you can look at it like a Facebook app right now. Facebook apps will try to get your attention by various ways. They might make a game that will entice you to play, or they might offer you a free coupon or a download, or they might just give you recognition as an author on a paper. So imagine if it's the same for health data, where instead of having on just your iPhone the 1.5 million apps you can download as games and different apps for iPhone, you have 1 million plus health apps, where you could say, yeah, I'm willing to donate my blood test results because it's going to tell me the likelihood of this condition in the future, and as a benefit, they've offered to make me an author on this paper. So you can go in and you can support it directly. Instead of having the researchers go through doctors and providers to find patients, they can go directly to the patients. So you can eliminate the middleman in a lot of these situations. And I think it's also extremely valuable on the regulation side, to have an app store type model. So right now, if you write a code for an iPhone app, you submit it to Apple, Apple will review it, and if it's good enough, they'll submit it to their app store, and they'll take a slight profit or a cut from it. The same thing could happen for health apps to make sure it's safe. So right now, if someone's got symptoms, what they'll do is they'll go to Google and they'll Google, yeah, I got a weird feeling in my eye and I had celery for breakfast, right? And they might end up on some weird forum that suggests something like anti-vaccines or something like that, misinformation. So we could avoid all that by having an approved health app store. So for example, you could have a hospital be an app store. They would verify apps, meaning they would go through submitted apps and say, yes, they're not giving you misinformation, yes, they're doing correct things with your data, and for that, the hospital could take a 10% cut of the equity. So it would actually be a self-propagating model, right. And you'd have better options. Instead of just going to the nearest hospital, you could look on your phone, and just like with Uber, you could say, you know, I am feeling this, or I need this type of surgery, where's the best hospital in my region? Or who's the most efficient, or who has open slots? So, I mean, there's a huge, exciting possibility, and if we get the API to stick, and if it's done properly, which we should write to the Meaningful Use Phase 3 people and, you know, state this heavy preference, because right now the comments are dominated by providers. If you read the comments in the field on the Meaningful Use Phase 3 when it's proposed in the summer, it's dominated by industry, by providers and big pharma saying, we already give patients access to their data through e-patient portals. Well, yes they do, but the e-patient portals are broken. What we need is an API that's standardized.
All right, so forgive me, I have to give a shout out to, there's a tweet chat that I follow routinely. It's Healthcare Leader, it's hashtag HCLDR, and I think that the conversations with that community absolutely points to the empowered patient, the access to data. So I would encourage folks to, you know, after they write in on those websites, it's also, you know, let's tee that up. Let's have more social conversations around the benefits, because I think that social really does help to educate and hopefully overcome some of those barriers that are thrown up by parts of the industry that may not be aligned with where the patient experience and the patient advocates are trying to move.
And a couple links if anyone's interested. Personal Genome Project is an amazing nonprofit where you can actually share genetic data. And they actually have a great system of, if you want to donate data, you have to pass a test showing you understand the liabilities, which is a great model. So, you know, right now when you sign up for software, you press the acknowledge terms and conditions, and almost no one reads that, right? For medical data, we want people to make sure that the informed consent is real, that they know what they're doing with their data. So that's a nice example. A couple other sites that are definitely worth checking out is Get My Health Data, which actually shows you steps and ways to request it and report it if hospitals aren't able to get you back the data. Cancer Commons is another great one, and Sage Bionetworks as well. So just a few names to toss out.
Well, I think that, you know, clearly your experience has probably propelled you in a direction that maybe you weren't considering before your diagnosis, but I think that you're just a model for so many of us that, you know, when you were given this challenge, what you've done with it, and the thoughtfulness that you've applied to thinking through how do you take something as challenging as a brain tumor and turn it into an opportunity where so many could potentially benefit from the knowledge that you've received. Kudos to you.
Well, thanks for having me.
It has been an honor having you here, Stephen Keating, here at the Guidewell Insights Lounge. My name is Kate Warnock. Please come join us again shortly. We'll be up with another interview.